Hey everybody, welcome back to my dark anthology. Um, Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We are actually turning something into a series. When I first changed this channel to a channel showcasing my writing, one of the first stories I put out, if not the first one, is called Dark Water. If you haven't seen it yet, it's a kind of seafair, golden age of piracy, adventure meets Lovecraftian style horror. It is one of, if not the most watched of my videos and was very popular, very well received. I also kind of wrote it as an origin story, not really knowing if I wanted to do it as a series or not, but I thought it would be an interesting story. And based off of y'all's response, and honestly, more importantly, it's my mom's favorite story. Um, I've decided to go ahead and turn it into a series. And this is the second installment. Dark Water would be the first installment, and then this is the very next episode in that series. Um, I hope you like it, and let me know what you think in the comments. You all take care and enjoy the video.
Dark Water, Shadows of Protection by Carl Otto. The market square buzzed with its usual morning chaos, but Sarah Miller noticed how her mother's smile tightened when she looked at the rising prices. The winter of 1675 had taken more than just her father's ship. "Maybe I could help at the docks after school," Sarah suggested, watching her mother count copper farthings for a loaf of bread that cost half again what it had last month. The smell of tar and hemp rope from the shipyards mingled with the morning fog. "I know all the knots already, and absolutely not." Margaret Miller's voice was firm but kind as she adjusted her worn wool shawl. "Your father wanted you to get an education, even if the schoolmaster thinks it's a waste on a girl." She stopped herself, but Sarah knew the rest. "So you'll have choices he never did." "Sarah! Sarah!" A familiar voice cut through the market's din. Lily Jones weaved through the crowd, past stalls of salted fish and West Indies spices, her dark curls bouncing with each step. Emily Jones followed behind, a basket of mending balanced on her hip, the widow's work that had become her lifeline these past 6 months. The girls collided in an eager hug while their mothers exchanged knowing looks. The sea had made widows of them both, though Margaret wore her grief more openly than Emily, who buried hers in endless work. "Did you hear?" Lily bubbled with excitement. "Captain Ross is letting students tour his merchant ship next week. Maybe we can go together?" Sarah's heart leapt, but she caught her mother's worried glance. "I don't know if—" "The girls should go," Emily said softly to Margaret. "We can't let fear keep them from the sea forever." Harbor Master Wells chose that moment to pass by their stall, his fine coat and polished boots marking him as someone who profited from others' work. His eyes lingered too long on Sarah, then shifted to Margaret. "Mrs. Miller," he said, touching his hat, "I've been meaning to speak with you about some employment opportunities, for both you and your lovely daughter." Something in his smile made Sarah step closer to her mother. "We're managing just fine, thank you," Margaret replied, her voice cold. Wells shrugged, but his eyes stayed on Sarah. "The offer stands. Times are hard, and getting harder. A young girl needs protection these days." He moved on, but the morning's warmth had faded. Sarah noticed her mother's hands trembling as she gathered their purchases. "Perhaps we should head home," Margaret said quietly. "It's getting late." Emily touched her arm. "Come to dinner tomorrow. The girls can study together, and I have some extra stew." Margaret's pride warred briefly with practicality. "We'd like that." As they walked home, Sarah glanced over her shoulder at the harbor. The ship's masts swayed against the gray sky like skeleton fingers, and for the first time in her life, the sea felt more threatening than welcoming. She didn't notice the shadow that passed overhead, or the way the puddles briefly darkened as they walked past. But something was watching, and it had seen Harbor Master Wells smile. 3 days later, Sarah's chair sat empty in class. Lily kept glancing at the vacant seat, a knot growing in her stomach. Sarah had been excited about their history test. She never missed school. By sunset, the whole neighborhood knew. Margaret Miller's screams had echoed down Cable Street when she found Sarah's room empty, The window opened despite the chill. On her desk lay her half-finished essay about famous naval expeditions, the ink still fresh. "She wouldn't run away," Margaret insisted to the constable, her voice raw. "Not without telling me, not with—" She held up Sarah's most prized possession, her father's brass compass, still sitting on her nightstand. She'd never leave this behind. The constable made non-committal notes, his eyes already distant. Another missing child from the poor side of town. Perhaps she went looking for work at the docks, like you mentioned she wanted. "She promised me she wouldn't," Margaret's voice cracked. "She promised." Emily held Lily close as they watched from their doorway. Other neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispers spreading like ripples in a pond. Sarah wasn't the first child to vanish from the harbor district in recent months, but she was the first from their street. That night, Lily couldn't sleep. She slipped out of bed and went to her window, the same window where she and Sarah used to sit and make up stories about the ships in the harbor. The moon cast long shadows across the empty street. Movement caught her eye, a figure standing impossibly still in the darkness. For a moment, it seemed to be looking right at her. Then it moved, and Lily gasped. The stranger's cloak didn't flutter in the wind. It rippled like water, leaving trails of darkness in the air. The figure turned toward Margaret Miller's house, and Lily saw its eyes, black as the depths of the ocean, filled with darkness blacker than anything she had seen. As she watched, it moved toward Sarah's window, examining something on the ground that no one else had noticed. Lily blinked, and the figure was gone. But in its wake, she heard a sound that would haunt her dreams, like waves crashing in reverse, like the ocean itself drawing in a breath of anticipation. That same night, across the harbor district, other eyes watched the shadows with growing unease. In the Salty Dog Tavern, where sailors gathered to escape the growing storm, whispered conversations turned to the darkness that stalked their streets. The sailors at the Salty Dog huddled closer to their drinks as the night grew darker. Big Tom, his weathered face lined with decades at sea, lowered his voice as the newer deckhands gathered round. "Dark water, they call it now," he muttered, eyes darting to the shadows in the corners. "Started 6 months back, when an unknown sailor washed up on shore, or what was left of him." "What do you mean, what was left?" a young sailor asked. "They found him on the beach, cold as death but breathing, eyes black as the deep, skin like a drowned man's. He babbled about something in the dark water, an elder god called Drevar that offered him a choice: die with his crew or live on as something else, something that would be his servant from the shadows." "But that man died in the hospital, didn't he?" another sailor chimed in. Tom shook his head. "Aye, that's what they say. But ever since then, something's been stalking the waterfront. Captains found drowned in their locked cabins, sailors driven mad by visions of the deep. Always the same story: black water, moving wrong, a figure in a cloak that ripples like waves. The way I hear it, everyone in this stories isn't missed. Fact, I reckon we are better off without," the young sail responded. "Aye, that's because it remembers being a sailor and a good man," Tom said softly. "Some say it's still trying to protect the harbor, just differently now. Some think that when it was still a man that it had a family here, wife, maybe kids. They say he's here to protect them at night. He's keeping watch, so you best be sure that you're right with your God." Thunder rolled in the distance, and the tavern's lanterns flickered. The sailors fell silent, each lost in thoughts of what might lurk in the spaces between light and shadow, and what price they themselves might pay to protect those they loved. In the harbor, Harbormaster Wells sat in his office, counting the night's profits. A knock at his door made him smile. "Come in, Jensen." A burly man entered, cap in hand. "The Miller girl's secured, sir. No witnesses. But—" He hesitated. "There's talk of something in the shadows. The men are nervous. They say that it's dark water, and he—" Wells laughed. "Superstitious fools. The only thing they need to fear is failing to meet their quota. The buyer arrives in 3 days. Make sure the merchandise is ready." Neither man noticed the darkness gathering outside the window, or the way the water in Wells' glass turned black for just a moment. But in the depths of the harbor, something stirred. The darkness had caught Sarah's scent, and with it, the stench of corruption. His cloak rippled as he merged with the shadows, following Jensen's trail through the twisting alleys. The man was careless, confident no one would dare follow him. Scattered drops of ale marked his path, along with the distinctive print of boots recently repaired with Spanish leather, a luxury only Wells men could afford. Dark Water tracked him to the Three Anchors Tavern. He studied the building's weathered facade, loose shutters, exposed beams, a latticework of handholds for someone who knew where to look. The skills that had once served him well as a sailor now served a darker purpose. He scaled the wall silently, his shadowy form blending with the evening gloom. A missing board in the gable provided access to the rafters, where he could observe unnoticed. The tavern's candles cast long shadows across the rough-hewn beams, providing perfect cover. "Warehouse by the old fish market," Jensen's voice drifted up from below. "Wells wants everything ready before the Dutch merchant arrives." 3 days ain't much time," another voice grumbled, especially with that shadow stalking the streets. "Keep your voice down," Jensen hissed. "And it's 2 groups. First lot goes to the warehouse tomorrow, the Miller girl and the others from the Harbor District. Second group comes in from the countryside day after." "Why the rush?" "Because Van Horn pays well for healthy stock, and he won't wait. His ship's due on the evening tide 3 days hence. Wells says he's got buyers in the Caribbean waiting. Rich plantations want house servants, and the fancy brothels in Port Royal always need fresh faces." Jensen took a long drink. "Different cargo from his African trade. These fetch higher prices." "What about the families? They're asking questions." "Let them. Constable's been paid. By the time anyone important starts listening, the merchandise will be long gone." Jensen's laugh was ugly. "Besides, who's going to believe a bunch of dock rats?" Darkwater's shadowy form rippled with barely contained rage. Dock rats. He remembered that term from his sailing days, remembered how the wealthy merchants had used it to dismiss the missing sailors' families who came seeking answers. Now, Wells and his men used it the same way, counting on the powerlessness of the poor to hide their crimes. His fingers left frost on the rafters where they gripped the wood, and Dravar's hunger stirred at his anger. More pieces fell into place. Darkwater had heard whispers of Van Horn, a Dutch slaver known for dealing in cargo no legitimate merchant would touch. Children vanishing from ports across the colonies, sold to plantation owners who didn't ask questions about their origins. He followed Jensen when he left, watching the man's failed attempts at stealth. The brute checked over his shoulder twice, but never thought to look up where Darkwater moved from roof to roof. At each turn, Jensen left more clues. A scrap of Sarah's shawl caught on a nail, muddy footprints leading to a hidden door, the echo of muffled voices from below ground. The warehouse district was a maze of shadows, but Darkwater moved through them like a current. 3 nights of tracking Jensen had led him here, to a nondescript building near the abandoned fish market. The guard's pattern was predictable. A side door opened every 4 hours for shift changes. As he waited in the darkness, Darkwater fought against Dravar's growing influence. The demon's hunger clawed at his mind, demanding more than just justice. "Let me show them true terror." Dravar's voice, the echoing of 1,000 drowned sailor, reverberating in his skull. "Let them feel the crushing depths." Darkwater grimaced in pain, trying to hold in the Elder God's wrath. "No, we do this my way." The side door creaked open. 2 guards stepped out, lighting pipes. Darkwater moved. His tendrils of shadow wrapped around the first guard's mouth before he could shout. The second reached for his sword, but froze as Darkwater's solid black eyes met his. "The children!" Darkwater's voice carried the echo of drowning souls. "Where?" The guard's mind cracked under the eldritch pressure. Images flooded Darkwater's consciousness. A hidden cellar, cages, Sarah huddled in a corner, clutching another girl's hand. And more. Wells' books showing profits from dozens of children, ships arriving at midnight, payments to constables. Darkwater released the guard, who crumpled, whimpering. The other had fainted, black briny liquid dripping from his ears. Inside, he found the cellar entrance behind stacked crates. The lock melted at his touch, darkness eating through metal like acid. The hinges screamed. The air grew thick with the scent of brine, cold radiating from Darkwater's form like Arctic currents. Water trickled down the stone walls, though the pipes were long dry. In the darkness, 8 pairs of frightened eyes watched him approach. "Sarah Miller," he called softly into the darkness. "I'm here to help." A small voice answered. Who are you?" "A friend of your father's," he said, the lie tasting bitter. Everyone's looking for you. As his eyes adjusted, he saw them, 8 children in crude cells. Sarah stood at the bars of her cage, showing the same courage her father had. Behind her, a small boy clutched her hand, while 2 sisters huddled together in the corner. The oldest, a girl about Sarah's age, pressed herself against the bars of the adjacent cell. "You're like the stories," Sarah whispered, "the shadow that protects the harbor. I've heard the sailors talk about you." The small boy whimpered. "Sarah?" His eyes. "It's okay, Billy." Sarah squeezed his hand. "He's here to help." Darkwater felt Dravar stir at their recognition. The demon enjoyed being feared, even as a force for good. "Stand back." The cell bars twisted under his touch, metal groaning like a ship in storm. Salt crystals formed where his fingers met iron, spreading like frost. One by one, he freed the children. The sisters clung to each other, but the older girl stood straighter, recognition dawning in her eyes. "You saved my uncle," she said quietly. "From the press gang last month. I saw you." Then a door slammed above. "Check the merchandise," Wells' voice. "Buyers coming early." Footsteps on the stairs. Dark water gathered the children behind him. The temperature plunged, their breath visible in the suddenly Arctic air. "Close your eyes," he told them. "Don't look until I say. Sarah, keep them together." Sarah nodded, gathering the younger ones close. Like in hide-and-seek, Billy, eyes squeezed shut, no peeking. Wells appeared in the doorway, flanked by Jensen and another thug. Their lantern light caught Darkwater's form, revealing his true horror. Seawater began seeping from the walls, running upward against gravity. "Dear gods!" Wells stumbled back. "Shoot it! Shoot!" The children huddled together, eyes squeezed shut as horror unfolded around them. Billy buried his face in Sarah's dress, while the sisters recited prayers in whispered Portuguese. The older girl gripped Sarah's hand so tight it hurt. First came the screams, not just of Wells and his men, but the echoing cries of countless souls lost to the deep. Then wet, terrible sounds of impact as bodies hit walls. The air grew thick with the scent of brine and decay, as if the ocean itself had invaded the cellar. The temperature dropped until their teeth chattered, frost forming on their eyelashes. Sarah felt something brush past them, like kelp underwater, but warm, almost protective. The darkness itself seemed to curl around them, shielding them from the worst of the sounds. "Please, mercy?" Wells' voice quivered. "Like the mercy you showed these children?" Darkwater's voice carried the weight of fathoms. But underneath it, Dravar's influence grew stronger, a chorus of drowned voices demanding retribution. The children heard splashing, as if the cellar was filling with water. A gurgling scream cut short, the sound of something being dragged across stone. "Yes!" Dravar's voice echoed through Darkwater. "Let them feel the depths. Let them know true terror." Jensen's wild shooting filled the darkness with flashes of light. In those brief moments, the children caught glimpses of writhing shadows and faces frozen in horror, then darkness again, broken by the snap of bone and a final, bubbling cry. The silence that followed was absolute. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, each drop echoing like a funeral bell. "Keep your eyes closed," Darkwater said softly, his voice human again, though strained. "Hold hands and follow my voice. We're going up the stairs now." He guided them carefully, his tendrils gently steering them away from what remained of Wells and his men. The children formed a chain, hands clasped tight. Billy wouldn't let go of Sarah's dress, and the sisters whispered prayers of thanks between sobs of relief. The older girl spoke softly as they climbed. "The harbor protects its own." "Yes," Darkwater replied, something ancient and sad in his voice. "It does." "You can open your eyes now," he said once they were safely outside. "You are safe. Those men won't hurt you or anyone else again." Sarah opened her eyes to find herself and the other children in the alley behind the warehouse. The monster who had saved them was already fading into shadow, leaving only the lingering scent of the ocean's depths. "Wait," she called. "Thank you." Darkwater paused. For a moment, Sarah saw something familiar in those black eyes. A father's love, a protector's dedication. "Get home to your mother," he said. "She's waiting." Hours later, Darkwater watched from a rooftop as Sarah ran into Margaret's arms. Neighbors poured out of their homes, drawn by the commotion. He saw Emily and Lily among them, his heart aching as they joined the celebration. The broadsheet would tell of an anonymous tip, of Wells' arrest, of a trafficking ring exposed. No mention of shadows that moved like water, or a guardian who walked the line between light and darkness. Dravar's voice rumbled in his mind. The hunger grows. We need more. Darkwater turned away from the scene of joy below. Then we'll find more criminals, more corruption. But we do it my way. In the harbor, the water grew darker, as if in agreement. There would always be shadows to fight, and Darkwater would be there, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, even if he could never step into the light himself. Out in the harbor, Van Horn's ship still sat at anchor, its captain wisely deciding to sail with the morning tide after hearing of Wells' fate. Darkwater watched the Dutch merchant's distinctive silhouette pace the quarterdeck, knowing that Wells had been just one link in a longer chain. There would be other ports, other children, other corrupt officials willing to look the other way. A week later, Sarah sat at her window, watching the harbor lights dance on the water. The compass in her hands had been her father's, and now it felt different, like a reminder that good men still watched over their loved ones, even from the shadows. In the street below, she saw Lily and Emily walking home from the market. They'd been bringing food every day, even though Sarah's mother insisted they couldn't repay such kindness. The harbor district takes care of its own, Emily had said, her eyes distant, as if remembering someone. Movement caught Sarah's eye, a familiar darkness sliding between pools of lamplight. The shadow paused beneath the window, and Sarah could have sworn those black eyes looked up at her for just a moment. She pressed her hand against the glass and whispered, "Thank you again." The figure inclined its head slightly, then continued its patrol. Sarah noticed how it lingered near Emily and Lily, keeping a watchful distance as they walked home. A week later, 2 orderlies dragged Harbor Master Wells through the iron entrance of Stormgate Sanitarium. His once fine clothes hung in tatters, soaked through despite the clear weather. His eyes darted wildly, seeing horrors in every shadow. "The water. It moves wrong," he muttered, his once commanding voice reduced to a hoarse whisper. "Black eyes, showing me drowning, over and over. So many voices in the depths." The attending physician, Dr. Harrison, reviewed the commitment papers. "Interesting case. Found babbling in the harbor district, trying to drink salt water." "Yes, sir," the constable replied. "Claims he needs to feel the depths to keep the shadows away. Won't go near fresh water. Says it's not dark enough. Keeps talking about some demon that showed him what drowning feels like without letting him die." Wells suddenly lunged forward, grabbing the doctor's coat with surprising strength. "You don't understand. It wasn't just darkness. It was alive. 1,000 dead men screaming in my head, showing me their last moments. The cold, the pressure, the burning in my lungs." His eyes glazed over. "Sometimes I still feel the tentacles, dragging me down, down, down." "And this creature?" Dr. Harrison made a note in his ledger. "It punished you for trafficking children?" Wells began to laugh, a broken sound that ended in sobs. "The children? He made me feel their terror, their helplessness. But worse, he showed me what waits in the deep, the ancient things that hunger." He curled into himself, shivering violently. "Even now, I hear it whispering. Dravar, Dravar, Dravar." The orderlies exchanged glances as they led him away. His final screams echoed through the sanitarium's halls. "The water is wrong! It's all wrong! The darkness has eyes." In her room across town, Sarah heard the rumors about Wells's fate. Some said his mind had shattered from guilt. Others whispered about a supernatural vengeance. But only Sarah and the other children knew the truth, that sometimes justice wore a cloak of living shadows, and mercy meant averting your eyes from its work. That night, like every night since her rescue, she left a small bowl of seawater on her windowsill, not out of fear, but gratitude. For in Saltmarsh, the darkness itself had chosen to protect the innocent, and even madmen sometimes spoke truth. At the docks, sailors began leaving small offerings, a coin, a candle, a prayer, for the spirit they called Darkwater, not out of fear, but gratitude. Stories spread of a shadow that haunted the corrupt and safeguarded the vulnerable. Emily heard these tales as she mended sails in the harbor. Sometimes, on her way home, She'd pause and look into the darkness, her hand touching the locket that held Simon's picture. The sea had taken her husband, but something about these stories of a dark guardian stirred memories of his promises to always protect them. Darkwater watched from above as Emily and Lily reached their door safely. His cloak rippled in the cool night air, and Dravar's voice rose with the tide. "The hunger returns," the demon reminded him. Darkwater turned his gaze to the darker parts of the city, where corruption festered like barnacles on a rotting hull. "Then let's feed it properly."
Thank you all for taking the time to watch my video and listen to my story. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm guessing if you've stuck through it through the end, you have some feelings about it. I'd love to hear them in the comment section. And if you like the material, please hit like and subscribe. And I'll catch you here next time. Thank you. Have a good day.